Good evening. My name is Stephen Tucker, and I've been asked to introduce this evening's conversation between our new Visual Arts Curator, Beth Hughes, and Kenneth Padley, the chairman of the Cathedral Visual Arts Advisory Panel. I've been asked, I think, because I've been a member of that advisory panel for nearly 6 years. Ever since I asked a question at an evening not unlike this one, where our previous curator, Jacqueline, was having a conversation with an artist who had an exhibition in the cloisters. And I asked my question, and after the meeting had finished, I was recruited, yes, to be a member. So think first before you ask a question at the end of this evening's talk. Cathedrals traditionally are a great place for art, but by the beginning of the 20th century, art in cathedrals, modern art in cathedrals, had become very rare. The arts had become largely divorced from the church. But then in 1955, Count Walter Hussey was appointed Dean of Chichester Cathedral. And Hussey had already commissioned works from Graham Sutherland and Henry Moore when he was vicar of St Matthew's, Northampton. And he and Bishop George Bell both had an interest in the arts, so Hussey continued to commission art in his role as the dean, and he was responsible for bringing works by Mark Chagall and Graham Sutherland, amongst others, and famously the John Piper tapestry behind the high altar in Chichester, at the unveiling of which the principal of the Theological College wore a pair of dark glasses. Other clergy followed in Hussey's footsteps. A well-known one was near here, Keith Walker, commissioned works for Winchester Cathedral by Hepworth and Anthony Gormley. I remember seeing in Durham Cathedral a video and sound installation by Bill Viola in 1996. And then to celebrate the millennium, there were a variety of exhibitions of contemporary art in cathedrals in southern England. Why this interest? Well, I think one reason is perhaps that as congregations declined in cathedrals, so it was found that engagement with the arts was a way of increasing visitors and funds and media profile, even though the process does take an enormous amount of hard work. But with the renewal of this relationship between art and church buildings, a lot of questions began to emerge, some of which we'll be thinking about this evening. For example, what is the relationship between the themes of contemporary art and a Christian building? What makes artists want to exhibit in such spaces? How do we assess what visitors to the cathedral to look at the art think of what they see? If we don't know much about art, how do we decide whether something is good? How might our faith be helped by looking at these works of art? Does art only raise ethical questions, or can it communicate something to do with transcendence? Can art be spiritual? And if so, what do we actually mean by spiritual? In 2009, Salisbury joined this great relationship between art and cathedrals with the arrival of Jacqueline Creswell, and you will remember many of her exhibitions culminating in the fantastic and huge exhibition of 2020. But tonight we're here to hear about the interests and outlook and ambitions of her successor, Beth Hughes, and her views on perhaps a few of the questions I've just been raising. One final point, if you hear a bell go off during this evening's conversation, it is not an example of modern art, it's a fire bell, and we'll need to leave the building and assembly as fast as possible out at the front. So, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for coming. It's really great to see such a good mix of people from the Cathedral and from the Sarum College network. So thank you, and thank you for coming and listening to Beth. So I guess to opening question to Beth really is tell us about yourself. Tell us some of the biographical stuff, some of your background, especially background in art and faith.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. So you can probably tell from my accent that I'm from somewhere a little bit further north. So I'm from, I was born in Warrington, and anyone from Warrington knows the full title is I'm from Warrington. It's halfway between Manchester and Liverpool, because you either know it for an IKEA or the train station, or you don't know it for anything else at all. So, and my parents I'm the youngest of 5 children. Quite a large gap in between us all. Some may say I was a mistake, I think surprise. And my parents were missionaries, and we grew up in a church in Warrington. But in my first 3 years, so not really when I can remember it, my parents used to smuggle Bibles into communist countries. And just the other day, I was saying to my mum, in January, I really fancy going to Hungary. I've never been before, and they have those lovely outdoor spas, and I thought that would be really nice on a very cold January evening. And she said, oh, you have been before a few times actually, but when you were a baby. So sort of pre my existing memory, I had sort of this life assisting them. I was their cover, because who would try and smuggle Bibles into communist countries with a newborn baby? But they did that with an organisation called OM, Overseas Mission, for a few years. And then they were deacons in our church for, well, up until they retired. They're now in their 80s. And after that point, so I stayed in Warrington, and then I've always had sort of an interest in art and an interest in faith. I was clearing out some books from my room, and there's so many books that sort of sit between that intersection. So from a very young age, in my teenage years, I was always interested, because as we'll go into later, I do feel like there is something in there that connects between art and faith, and how we understand elements around humanity, around ourselves, around our beliefs. And so then it got time to go to university. I think my parents were just generally pleased that someone from our family was going to go. And I chose to do English literature with history and art, history of art, sorry, because I liked English literature, history and art. And I felt this was going to be my broad way of doing them all. And if I'm very honest, when I went to university at York, I didn't know what history of art was. But I really fell in love with it. I've never been a practicing artist, but to be around ideas and to be around the sort of the visual form of somebody's ideas, somebody's vision, someone's beliefs, I find incredibly inspiring. And it will never, I don't think it'll ever get old for me, because there will always be new artworks, new ways to look at them. And when we talk about the context of the cathedral, every time you move an artwork from a different place and see it in a different light, it changes again. I've got some examples of times in my career when that's happened. So I went to York, and I started off studying contemporary British art. And then in York, I got completely intoxicated by the city, and I flipped to medieval ecclesiastical architecture. So I did a complete 180, and my undergraduate dissertation was on the preachings of Girolamo Savonarola of Burning of the Vanities fame, and his influence on sort of decoration, I guess, in Florence in the 1490s. And then I graduated from that, and I thought, oh, what am I doing? And then I did a master's, and I went back to contemporary British art again. So coming to the cathedral and all of a sudden having some architectural terms in my head that are sort of buried from my previous studies, it's been nice to unearth some of that. And then when I graduated, I sort of had this, I dropped literature by this point, and I've always still enjoyed reading. But I decided that art was where I had this interest. knowing that I never wanted to be a practicing artist, but I wanted to work in that world. I had no idea what the jobs were, and I didn't know anybody else that worked in the art world. And I started off working at York Art Gallery. And the beginning jobs you do in a sort of a museum and art gallery career can be quite something. So one of my first jobs was to dress up as Victorian and to lead people around museums and galleries. I used to have to do sleepovers in the gallery, where there was one night I had 110 brownies from a local brownie and guides group sleeping over, and around 3, and they all you could hear all night was rustle, rustle, because they had so many sweets on them. And there was a couple throwing up around 3 a.m, which was, I mean, I was 22 by this point. I had no idea what I was doing. Anyway, so you have to sort of pay your dues early on. When I first started to get into grips with art, more than sort of the visitor interaction side of it, one of my first jobs was a long time ago. William Etty lent a number of his drawings to York Art Gallery, and they catalogued them in a ledger, but with things like picture of a hand about 2.5 inches. And then after William Etty's family asked for them back, and we had to work out from this ledger, amongst all the drawings that York Art Gallery already had, which ones are which. So it became this kind of incredible but frustrating game. You had to try and match them all up. So early doors in museums and galleries, you tend to do quite a lot of the donkey work. And then I moved around a little bit. So I worked in Bradford in an art gallery. And I was saying earlier tonight, when you start in museums and galleries, you don't get to pick the exhibitions that you do. You get given a topic and then you have to deliver on it. And you become an expert in a certain topic for about 10 months, and then you move on to another. So you can ask me about Bradford City Football Club and when they won the FA Cup. I know a lot about that. You could ask me about circus art. I had to do an exhibition on that at one point. Blue Peter, I did an exhibition of 100 years of Blue Peter. And then as you move on in your career, you eventually build up a reputation and get more autonomy over the exhibitions that you get to choose to do. So then as I sort of moved around a lot, I never intended to move to London. I was a confirmed northerner and I moved in various different places. I worked in the Lake District at an art gallery there, which was an incredible place to work. Very extreme in lots of ways. There was once when I got stranded in my tiny little Nissan Micra in the snow for 7 hours, which I realised I wasn't quite built for this environment just yet. And then a job came up at the Arts Council collection in London, and I looked at it and went, that is a great job for somebody else. I'm not moving to London. And then it was the Sunday before the deadline was 9 o'clock on the Monday, and I wrote my application, and within a month I was moving to London from the Lake District, and I stayed in that job for 7 years. And what I saw in that role, which was ever sustaining, I left last Christmas, was the way that art can connect people. Arts Council collection is a lending collection, so it doesn't have an art gallery of its own. And it lends to other places. So museums and galleries, absolutely, but also schools, hospitals, libraries. I used to joke that anywhere with a wall was of interest to us, or not, actually, sculpture as well. Because we used to do a project which was in hospitals, and there was some incredible research that came out of that project, which, the artworks became a point for somebody to talk about when they were struggling to talk about anything else. There was one project I did where I was working with a group of 6 women in a temporary housing facility who had substance abuse issues, and we had nothing to connect us. When we first met, they looked at me with deep suspicion, as you probably all are doing now, and they, we had nothing to talk about. And then I brought out these photographs that we had in the collection by an artist called Richard Billingham. They're called Ray's a Laugh. Ray is his father. His father was an alcoholic, and he took sort of these candid pictures around his home, and it was like seeing this wall sort of evaporate between us as they looked at these photographs, and they found them humorous in parts, because they are a very funny series of photographs. They found them sad, and there was this point where people from, we had very different lives and we could connect. And I'm always searching for those moments, like, where do you create moments of connection? with people, and I think that's part of the power of what art can do. And then there was a email that landed in my inbox one day. I want to say it was from Jane, I can't remember exactly who, from Salisbury Cathedral when I was in my old job, asking if we could lend some artwork to Salisbury Cathedral. And I thought, yeah, sure, why not? And we had this series of 6 tapestries by a very unknown artist called Grayson Perry. I had been working on that exhibition for 6 years by this point, and I'd installed them in loads, 4 times a year for 6 years, 24, maybe, yeah, lots and lots of places, in lots of different art, but only in art galleries. So I'd only install them in those places. And then I sort of suggested them to them, thinking, well, I'm not sure if this is what a cathedral wants, but we do have this exhibition. And then when Jane went away and talked about it with the team here, we then set up this call with the Dean and a few other people to talk about the tapestries and whether it was the right thing for the cathedral. And it is absolutely one of the best conversations I've ever had about art, ever. We've talked about the appropriateness of them. We looked in the sort of the iconography in the tapestries, but we talked about what people would make of them, what visitors would make of them, what the artist wants. Does it matter what the artist wants? What would it mean to put these tapestries in this space? And then when it came to installing them, and we saw all these connections come out that we hadn't talked about in that Zoom conversation, because you don't know what art's going to do until it's in the space itself. And there's one part in the tapestry where one of the figures has a tattoo on his back of St. Michael crushing the devil. That's fair to say? And we displayed it underneath this window, and one of the press people said, "Oh, isn't that the same scene in the window?" And you sort of post-rationalise, go, "Yeah, that's what we planned." Absolutely wasn't. And everything changed. The colours in the tapestries changed. The meaning in them changed. I've been working with these tapestries by this point for years, and I had not seen the things that I saw when we brought them to the cathedral. And that, I guess, brings us up to sort of present day. So that was last summer, was it? Yes. And I definitely was at a point in my career where I was ready for my next step, and I was ready for a change. I was being pushed into sort of more leadershipy roles, which is not me. I really love working with art, and I love working with artists, and I love exhibition making. And I didn't want to move away from those things. So I decided to quit my job with no other, well, with some work available, working with the cathedral by this point. And I literally sat in my kitchen one day with a piece of paper being like, I could do pet sitting, I could alter people's clothes. I was thinking about what I could do. And then, this year has given me an incredible amount of freedom to explore the things that I do enjoy and really work out what that is. And this year, the cathedral, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, doing the To Be Free exhibition, putting works around the cathedral, hearing people's feedback, seeing how people interact, seeing how people move around the space. There's points where we were installing one of the artworks, and I counted that I heard 6 different languages whilst we were installing this one artwork for an hour and a half. It's an incredible place. That's nothing like any of the exhibitions or any of the relationships that I've worked on before. So I think that pretty much brings us up to present day.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, one of the joys about working in the cathedral is we've liberated you from the FA Cup and from boundaries. Perhaps can you share a little bit about what you see as the particular opportunities and challenges of the context in which you're working now?
Yeah, I guess depending if you're a glass half full or a glass half empty, I think all these things are both opportunities and challenges. My curatorial practice has completely shifted in this particular role. In a very traditional art gallery, what's front and centre is the art, and in theory, although we know it's not always the case, in theory the building is supposed to disappear into the background and just be the platform on which you see this art. In lots of contemporary galleries, white cube is king, but even in the sort of older, more traditional gallery setting, the theory is that the architecture supports the artwork, but it's the artwork that stays front and centre. When I started working at the Cathedral, I wasn't very long into it before thinking, well, that's not what happens here, and that would be a battle that you're always going to lose. So why do that? I think one of the opportunities in the Cathedral is to reposition the artwork to be in relationship with the space, to not ignore what might be on people's minds when they come to the Cathedral, but to embrace that and to run with it. One of the challenges is definitely that the building is lots of things to lots of different people. It is first and foremost a place of worship. It is a visitor attraction. It will be for some people a place to come and shelter for a little bit. It'll be a place that they might not have thought about, but they're on a visitor route in some way. It's a place of music, a place of theatre and theatricality. It's a lots of things to lots of different people. So my challenge in no uncertain terms is I'm never going to make everybody happy with the artwork that I put in, but I need to do it. But my opportunity is definitely to do something focused and do it well. So with the To Be Free exhibition, the theme came from the Dean. It came from chapter that they wanted to have a year thinking about liberty and freedom, and that gave me some parameters to work into. And then I thought, well, what can the art programme do that won't be done in any other part of the Cathedral's life? So I'm not trying to replicate a sermon through the artwork that I'm doing. I'm not trying to, copy off anything else. I'm trying to think about what art does uniquely and tell those stories through art. So I chose 6 artists that I thought their viewpoints might not be represented in other parts of our work, but they would bring us a very a unique narrative that we can discuss through this exhibition. Another one of the challenges and opportunities is the Cathedral is in extremely rich context, both visually. As I said, with the Grace and Perry tapestries, I'm used to those things feeling absolutely massive, and then we put them up and they were like a postage stamp on the wall of the Cathedral. Same with some of the works last year when I was looking to install Mona Hatoum's hanging mobile map, if any of you remember that. I thought, gosh, this is going to be really dominating. And then you put it into the Cathedral and it became very ethereal, and it sort of floated a little bit in that space. So the visual context is very strong. And when Stephen was saying in the introduction, what's in it for the artists, I think part of that would be to see their work in such a strong visual context. But the kind of thematic context, these conversations that you can have between artwork and between faith in this space is so unique, and I don't know of it happening anywhere else. I think Salisbury is doing something very unique by doing this program to this level of investment in thought and resource and all of those kinds of things. It is a challenge because everything we do means something. It all brings with it a level of association and meaning. But what crosses over for me is in our busy, chaotic lives, when you're out on the streets, there is so much that wants to keep us on our surface level. So there's so much that wants to keep you spending or feeling a bit anxious or all those kinds of things. And what I think I really observe being in the Cathedral is people slow down, and it's like taking a breath of fresh air. People, instead of looking down all the time, are looking up, and you feel that's that change in pace. And I think art, sometimes because it confuses people, but sometimes because it sort of prompts you, it asks you to think a little bit further. And I think there's a really interesting parallel that can happen there with asking us to go a little bit further and to delve a little bit deeper.
Thank you. And you've touched there really on how the themes to which you were working this year around freedom and liberty connected with core value of what the Cathedral is about. And as we go into future years, we'll be thinking about the environment in 2024, the effect of climate change, and then the year after around the Cathedral's involvement with water and being the city on the 5 rivers. But you've also started to tease out there, as Stephen also talked about at the beginning, around art in a sacred space. And what's particular and unique about it in in a place of prayer and worship, and you know, all those different uses which people have the space, which you've started to unpick for us.
Yeah, I think there's such a connection with humanity in those, you know, with faith. I think that um, it being in a space where people are, you know, come to their faith with from lots of different points of view, lots of different mindsets. I think art can be this kind of connector that helps people to sort of push you forward or to challenge you, I suppose, into a different direction. So um, it changes the space quite a lot. So I think when you're in the cathedral and you are in a place where you're sort of examining what's in your heart at any given time, or what's most pressing on your mind, you might be bringing your anxieties or all the things that you know are going on in your world or in the greater world to the cathedral. I think putting art in a space, especially the art that we're doing, which is asking us questions, which is, you know, asking in lots of ways, lots of quite big global questions at the moment. It's not that we'll do that every year. It sort of helps you to push forward, I think, and to think about other perspectives, to bring in this idea that we might be kind of trapped in thinking in one particular way, but the artwork in our own time with a feeling of slowness as well, that's not being sort of pushed at you. You don't have to be there at a specific time or in a specific context, but the art can help to broaden those questions for you and sort of move you forward.
And some resonance there with music, which of course is very important to this cathedral and to many others as well. It helps us explore things which other media, and certainly which words, either spoken or written, might not necessarily do so. We're really grateful for Sarum College for accommodating this evening, and the principal, James, is sorry that he can't be with us. He's a fellow member with us, and Stephen and Jane on the Arts Advisory panel, but he does have a particular question which he wants us to probe in his absence, which is around the Cathedral's arts programme and how it contributes to the wider social, cultural city life, and the diocese as well. How does that relate the cathedral to these other aspects of community around us?
I think art is a great tool for placemaking. Just on sort of a very simple level, if you think of Anthony Gormley's Angel of the North, you immediately think of a place. There's lots of other artworks that really connect place to sort of like a visual identity that isn't about commercialism, isn't about big shopping centres, or it isn't about you know, other elements. It's about sort of a connection with culture, and I think putting art in the cathedral, I think it can help bridge the gap, you know, between the city and the cathedral gates, because you know, as an outsider, they do feel like two slightly separate places, but obviously they're very much reliant and connected with each other. And the art is something that can visually draw people through and across those boundaries. But I feel that what we can also do is we can bring viewpoints, or we can bring people to the cathedral through the artwork that wouldn't necessarily come to the cathedral or wouldn't necessarily see that. And I think that can be really, really powerful. Art can be a really incredible tool. You know, it's a visual language as opposed to a spoken language. It can be something that translates outside of you know, people's, you know, spoken languages, and in a place that is so international as Salisbury, with the amount of people that come from lots of different places, the art can be something which is a unified moment of recognition, which I think can be really powerful. As well as, you know, the original artwork is the building itself. It is an incredibly artistic building, and again, when we talk about what's in it for the artist, to align their artwork in that kind of space is an incredibly, you know, powerful point for them. So I think as placemaking, art is this really powerful tool to create an identity to an area, but also to identify with lots of different people at the same time without needing to share the same language.
And bringing in people from some very different backgrounds and experiences there, which starts to open up one of the questions, a perennial question which we have in the cathedral, not just in relation to art, but in relation to everything which is there, which is around interpretation and how much interpretation should be put, what interpretation should be put. There's a particular question with art, I think, about to what extent should we assist the viewer in their understanding of the piece, and to what extent should we assist the artist in explaining his or her artwork. Can you just talk us through a little bit about that tension and how you as a curator seek to walk that boundary between the artist and the viewer, the maker, the craftsperson, the creative originator, and us as receivers?
Absolutely. So this is the joy now of being freelance, is I can give you my actual opinion on this. Because this is a debate that extends outside of this context. There is a long-running battle between interpreting artwork, not interpreting artwork. There's a kind of a view that artists don't like anything written about their artwork. That's absolutely not true. My view on it is you've got to address the questions that are most prescient, because and that's got to be specific to each artwork. So I would never have one way of interpreting all the artworks in the show. I think everything has to go back to what is the key point about this artwork. Very early on in my career, I went to this interpretation training strategy meeting where they said every artwork should have 3 levels of interpretation, and they called them, for people who are deemed studiers, streakers, and there was another S. But basically, the streakers are the people that they want to skim past everything. They just want like a one line. So what you want to communicate through that artwork, you do for the streakers in like a sentence. There's a middle layer, I can't remember the S, but for people that want the top layer but just a little bit more. So they, you give them a way of interpreting the work which is just a little bit more, and then you get then the studiers, which is that's probably me, who want to see the artwork, but they also want to know an incredible amount of contextual information around that. So you look at different ways of interpreting things. My view is everything should be specific. You should know at the beginning of an exhibition what you want to achieve. What would you like people to go away with? And with the To Be Free exhibition, we wanted people to go away thinking about what freedom means to them today. And so all the interpretation had these ideas that, and because that line was about them being self-reflective, in the interpretation we put questions. So we didn't necessarily give you the biography of Cornelia Parker, but we gave you some ideas around her artwork, which gives you this idea of what does freedom mean to me today. But art has a reputation with it, which for lots of people it can feel very difficult to, especially contemporary art, can feel difficult to penetrate. My view on that is the art world can be its own worst enemy, and I've seen lots of cases where pretentiousness is seen as the epitome, and I thoroughly believe that access to art is everybody's human rights, because it's about culture and it's about belonging and it's about seeing yourself in a place and recognizing that you belong here. And I get very, very cross when it's seen as this cherry on the top of the cake when it is part of the cake. And I think that we have to make sure that we give people the tools to access that artwork. And it's not about dumbing down, or it's not about over explaining things, but it's about giving people ways in which help them feel comfortable, because as soon as we start to put up barriers, people switch off. I mean, I do myself, where I go into an art gallery. I was reading something the other day where I saw the word crepuscular written in a label, and all I could think of was, sounds like a skin condition though, doesn't it? And I've completely moved away from the artwork. So the text can't supersede the artwork. It can't be this showy sort of element. It's got to be something that supports, and it's got to be there. And I do think also, I'm a big fan of how we do it in the cathedral. We give people a leaflet, because then you can choose to read that leaflet or not. I like now that we don't have, in previous roles I've put text right next to an artwork, and you do get this crowd of people sort of around it like this. I like that we can separate those two and that they can be accessed in their own way. And I hope through the way that we work with this, it encourages people to have those clues in, but then to spend time with the artwork, because whatever I say about it or whatever we think it will mean something different to lots of different people, and we don't want to close down those avenues.
Thank you, that's really helpful and resonates with some of the wider conversations we have in the Cathedral around interpretation. We'll know more about that. I point you in the direction of our colleague Jane Morgan over here, Director of Visitor Experience. It's something which a lot of work has been done in the last few years about making our printed material something which is accessible to people who might be aged 10 or something like the reading age of 10, which of course includes a number of our international visitors who might have less English than a native speaker. But also within some of those panels, there are QR codes which can take people further and deeper, those sort of studiers which you've outlined in relation to art. I'm grateful for you explaining who the streakers were, by the way. I wasn't sure whether we had any of those in the cathedral. Now, one of the things that you said there was that art is something for everybody. It's a human right for everybody. Alongside that, I'm conscious that art is often perceived as being quite a lefty thing. And how can we hold that, but also make sure it is still something for everybody?
Yeah, gosh. How do I answer that? Yeah, well, I guess. How do I? I mean, yes, it does have a reputation for being a very lefty discipline. I think, I mean, there's so. I mean, I would hope that in the kind of universality about art, that it would transcend people's sort of more political beliefs, and how that translates into their wider beliefs. I would hope that there are moments with artwork that can be those great connectors that can cover those divides. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I would say, when you look at some of the large art galleries, I never feel like they're very particularly lefty environments, but the contemporary art world, and I think because of the way that the contemporary art world is in this country, I don't think you'd have that same experience really in America, because I think the art world, depending on where you are in America, is quite different, and it has a very different demographic in that respect. In the British artwork, it is much more left leaning. How do I think we bridge that? I don't know. Is the short answer. All I would hope, I don't want to get into these sort of reductive works, but when I see art, which I think this is really good art, I see it because I feel like the people in my life, and I'm probably counting my parents in this, that don't really buy into the kind of art world or what it can mean. I see it and I think this they could get. This for them will mean something to them. And I think it can sort of cross those divides. And I would hope at that point we can have these conversations where, I think some of the most interesting conversations come with people that are on completely opposite poles to you. It's that vanity of small differences, isn't it? Where the closer you are to people, the more you kind of rub up against them. And I hope that art can be one of those moments where it helps people of very different views come together.
And that's, of course, a bit of what we're trying to do at the Cathedral. We want the Cathedral to be a cathedral for all, with open doors. Inclusion and diversity are among our priorities. You never know who the next person is going to be to walk through the door. So to sort of, I suppose, assist this conversation, see where the art is going to fit into our visitor programme and what we've got coming up over a certain period. Beth, as Visual Arts Curator, is supported through the Arts Advisory Panel, which Steve mentioned at the start. Can you perhaps say how do you work with the panel? And also bearing in mind, on the panel, we've got people who have connections with galleries and other resources which you can draw in. How does the panel work in a practical way in supporting your ministry in the Cathedral?
Yeah, so the way that this works, so I get a lot of my directive from chapter about what we'd like to achieve in the through our programming, and then I will go away and start to develop an exhibition narrative. So it can be very tempting to be like, oh, but that looks great, let's have that, let's have that, let's have that. But then you would never know what to choose and what not to choose. So I try and set myself parameters, which then becomes the exhibition narrative. So what is this exhibition, but also what is it not? So what are the works that regardless of how wonderful artworks I might find them, what are they not, what's not going to be in this exhibition? And I've had a lot of that conversation when we think about next year's exhibition around the environment, which is such a big theme, but we want to do something well and we want to do something quite precisely. So then I'll develop a narrative and I'll start to look at the artists and artworks that might support that. And then I'll come to the panel and I present my thinking to the panel. And then it's a really interesting conversation because on that panel we've got people who work in the arts world, who work for commercial galleries, who have incredible contacts that I can sort of draw on. I don't know if you want me to go into the logistical way of how I actually wrangle the artworks off people to get them into the space, but there is wrangling to be done.
Not physical.
Not physical, but there's a lot of, but it'd be great in the cathedral, wouldn't it? So they definitely help me with the negotiation side of that, which is really helpful. And thinking about the kind of, they will bring an art world influence to it of, oh, you're looking at this theme, well, this artist is doing this at the moment, and did you know that this artist is doing this, which is really helpful. Also on the panel, we have people who work in the cathedral, who know how this cathedral works day in, day out, who hear what visitors say and look at visitor research, because what we do is for people. I'm not doing art for art's sake. I'm doing it so people come and experience the artwork, and it will mean something for them. So we have that element, but then also through Kenneth and through Stephen, we think about the kind of the resonances in the artwork for people's faith, and how this artwork, what this will mean, and the sort of the directions we can take it in, which I'm sure these artists will have never experienced for their own artwork before, but it gives this incredibly rich layer where we're looking to connect people to these artworks through faith, and how, when we're thinking about the interpretation, or whether we're thinking about the events, or whether we're thinking about where we place it in the cathedral, there's practical elements that come out through these kind of conversations around faith and art that we have in the panel meetings.
So perhaps just one last big question from me, and that is about, is there such a thing as Christian art?
I mean, you can all disagree with me if you like, but I think all art is Christian art, because I think my view, and I know lots of people will disagree with me in the art world, maybe in this room, but once the art has left the artist, it doesn't lose its author altogether, and there is an element, especially because we work in contemporary art, where we refer back to the author, but the artwork then, to a large extent, will mean something to the person who views it. So it's like does a tree make a sound if it falls in the forest? Is an artwork an art is an art an artwork if nobody's looking at it? I think it's only activated at the point that somebody is experiencing that artwork and that they're looking at it. In which case, I think it connects with elements around humanity and faith. And I think that any artwork, and every artwork, is a Christian artwork. In the artworks that I've selected so far, I've not chosen artworks which are overtly Christian, but I will. Do you know that there's no reason why I haven't done that to this point, other than the fact that I've been led by what we wanted to achieve through the exhibition. And there are artworks we're thinking about in the coming years, which are by Christian artists, and they are what you might call quite classically Christian art. So my view is, yes, there is Christian art, and because the term Christian art isn't like modernist art. It's not connected to a movement or something like that. I think Christian art is about humans coming to artwork. So I think all art is Christian art.
We're putting together stuff which talks to major Christian themes, and therefore resonates with the wider purposes of the cathedral, whatever the media or the particular background and faith tradition of the artist. We've given a few trailers in terms of next summer around the environment, and come back in May, and look into 2025 around water. But perhaps can you just say a little bit about Advent and Christmas, because we try to have two significant installations around the year. The one which coincides with the main visitor season, May through to September, but then also stuff around Advent and Christmas time, which it's not another telling of the Advent and Christmas story, is it? But it's about work which talks to some of the themes which we will encounter as we hear again the Christmas story and the preparation for it and what flows out of it in Epiphany Tide. So we've got installation coming in very shortly, which will be with us until the end of the greater Christmas season at Candlemas in early February.
Yeah, so lots of spoilers here, I'm afraid. But we're going to be showing the work of an artist called Shazad Darwood. And Shazad is a multidisciplinary artist, so he's very research led, and the mediums that he works in are led by the ideas and the research that he does. So he has done a very large project called Leviathan, and we're going to be showing a section of Leviathan in the cathedral. The main body of work that you will see as soon as you work through the cathedral is there'll be a series of painted hangings, 12 to be very precise, that will go down the nave, which we're hanging next week. I'm not nervous about that at all, especially with lots of candles coming for starting the lights. It'll be fine. And these hangings are incredibly poignant, and Shazad worked with a department in the University of Milan called the Lebanov department, and Lebanov department catalogues the personal belongings of people who have attempted to make migrant crossings across the Lampedusa Strait and have been unsuccessful. And they wanted to create this archive of personal objects to remember these people's lives, because there is a large extent where people in these kinds of really tragic situations become statistics. But they also wanted a resource where the relatives of these people could, in time, come and research or find objects to do with their relatives or friends. And he took a selection of these objects and he hand painted them. So when you see these banners hanging in the nave, they are paintings that will be hung. And some of them are very everyday objects. There's a memory stick painted on one of them. I mean, they're very sort of abstracted, so you might not immediately go, that's a memory stick. There's one which is a wrap of soil from somebody's homeland, because they got some cling film and wrapped up some soil and put it in their pocket. There's passport, there's things like that, but they are all commemorating lives and people who've had to make very, very difficult decisions. So this will be the work that goes along the nave. There'll be 2 video works which think about the future. So Shazad, through doing extensive research with marine biologists, humanitarian charities, he looks at the intersection between environmental change, around migration and around mental health. And the 2 film works will think about the future, just a little bit into the future. So you'll think about sort of 40 to 50 years from now, how the environment is changing and what that's meaning for people's lives and how they see their lives changing in the sort of immediate future. As well as there'll be a sculpture in the Audley Chapel, which is a small whale called Leviathan, so the exhibition's title, which is based on Moby Dick. You can see a tiny little Ahab on top of this sort of sculpture, and we have a sculpture in the chapter house as well. So there'll be a journey through the cathedral, as well as a very large hanging, which will be in the north transept called Anthropopangaea, imagining the world as one landmass. So if there were no borders, people didn't have to make migrant crossings because lands were joined together and we were sort of one united continent. What we're thinking about this, it's obviously not a very traditional telling of the kind of Christmas story or Advent story. We're thinking about migration, we're thinking about movement, we're thinking about sort of our humanity towards each other through these artworks. And Shazad doesn't like to pin down his artwork to one. It's obviously a very poignant, incredible body of work, but he's not trying to pin it down to one interpretation, and so we're not trying to do that too. There's lots of beauty in these artworks, and then as you start to uncover the layers behind them, there's lots of poignancy in there too. So we hope that this really, grounds people, helps people to think about the year we've just had, the year ahead, and yeah, the artworks become that talking point.
Touches on a number of contemporary themes, things are on the news, but I guess also for me, from a Christian perspective, I'm reminded that it is the messiness and the brokenness of the world into which God in Jesus is born at Christmas. And specifically around this migration stuff about Jesus was himself a refugee, the shadow side of the Christmas story, as he flees from the wrath of Herod in and out of Egypt. And again, we also know as Christians the priority of the Christian calling to our stewardship for creation. It's one of the 5 marks of mission as the Anglican Church understands it. So lots of points of connection, which I'm immediately getting from what we're hoping to exhibit, and I hope you do as well. We've been talking for 50 minutes now, and I hope that some of what we've been discussing are some of the questions which you will have brought with you, and which you might have asked to Beth if you had a bit of a one-to-one time. We do have a bit of time to take some questions. Can I suggest let's just take 2 minutes, talk to your neighbour, think about some of the things which have been raised by what you've heard so far, and if there are any questions coming out of that, we will have probably about 15 minutes to take those. If people want to ask specific things from what you've heard or other things which you might have brought with you tonight. So have a quick natter and I'll pull us back together in just a minute or two. Let's draw things back together, if we may. Sorry to be cutting across those conversations. So from what you've heard and what you've reflected, are there particular things that you want to ask of Beth?
Hi Beth, I'm Sonia. I'm very interested in young people. I have a daughter who's an artist as well, and her ambition is to give people a voice. When you put together these exhibitions, do you think about how we're going to help young people to understand the art, and how we help young people to be able to reflect on the art, be it that it's in the cathedral? Is that something you bear in mind? Because I think, having worked with young people, a lot of them stand away from the arts. You know, how can we help them through your exhibitions?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because there's definitely some work that I've done in previous roles which speaks to that. We did a project earlier this year, not that long ago, a few months ago, around the To Be Free exhibition, where we brought in an artist to work with students from Wiltshire College. So we brought in a protest banner maker, the most prolific protest banner maker in the country, called Ed Hall, who designs banners for lots of artists. And we did 2 days worth of workshops with students from Wiltshire College, which is often the most difficult age to engage in the artworks, that sort of, but they're interested in art because they are choosing to do art, you know, but getting that kind of connection between the art that they make and the art that exists. I think, yeah, that's a really difficult part to bridge. As part of those 2 days, I talked to them about the exhibition. I took them around the exhibition To Be Free. I talked to them about exhibition making, because, you know, lots of people might want to be artists, but there might be a few of me in there that want to do the roles that I do that I didn't know existed when I was that age. And then the 2 different groups over the 2 days, we went away and we just talked about freedom. And what I find really fascinating is that age group seems to be far more politically aware and active definitely than I was at that age. And so we gave them free rein to just talk about things that were important to them, which they thought either curbed or enhanced their feelings around freedom. So we had a day with each of them alongside Ed, who's the banner maker. And then they all did their own individual designs, and then they went away, and Ed took those designs and made them into the banner that you can see displayed at the moment. And then we invited all the students back, and some came, some didn't. You know, they are almost adults. They're you know, it's their free choice as how they interact with this. But what was really nice of the group that came back, which was nearly all of them actually, there was this moment where they were like, "Oh, do you think that's you? Oh, that's from my design." And it's moments of recognition that are so important. And I think that project, in some ways, from my point of view, was quite simple actually. But we need to do that, and we need to do it consistently, because we need to show that this is a place for them, where they will be able to see themselves, even in small moments of recognition or larger moments of recognition. You know, there's this old sort of adage that always comes up when people talk about art in art galleries, that the reason that the Mona Lisa is so famous is because people already know what it looks like before they go to see it, and they go for something that they're always going to see, and everyone goes, oh, it's small, but that's the only thing that they don't know is the size. You've got to give people moments of recognition, either of themselves or of something that they feel is familiar. And I think we need to do more work with that age group to go to reach them. They're not a hard to reach audience, we're just not doing a good job at reaching them. And we need to look at it from that point of view, I think.
We know that art is a significant driver of inclusion in the cathedral. I'm conscious, for example, of the Blue Sky Station work, which was outside the west front of the cathedral, that was put in for the Spirit exhibition of 2020, and that was a time-limited work in that exhibition. If there are things in which young people can engage with, physically as well as visually, then we're committed to doing that. Thank you, Sonia, for your question. I should have said we are recording this session, so if you want to ask a question but don't want it recorded, then please do so, but just catch me afterwards and we will take that out of the record. But we're looking to make a record so that those who can't make it here tonight or who might have questions in the future, we're able to refer them to that.
Can I ask the next bit of that question? What is then being done with the artworks and those young people for the teachings of the church and to link them in with the faith? Because if you don't have a next generation and a younger generation, where's the church going to be in 50 years' time? So how do you get that next generation in through the art?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I don't know if there is one answer to that in lots of ways, but as I said, I think inclusion, like meaningful inclusion, where it is a point where whatever they're telling us they're then seeing happen, is really important. And that being a gateway into being part of the cathedral's life, and to exploring their own feelings around faith. It can be that really great stepping stone. I mean, I find the cathedral an incredibly welcome building, but if it's not something you're used to, it could be a very imposing building. So giving the cathedral that incredible sense of warmth for everybody, especially for groups that might not feel it is for them, is a tactic. And I do think the art can bring a feeling of warmth and recognition. And we experienced it with Yinka Shonabari's artwork when I was doing tours with lots of different groups. I would give a history of the fabrics that I used in that exhibition, and the amount of people that would tell me things like, oh yeah, my aunties had fabrics like this, or yeah, we used to sew from those fabrics, or I remember my mum's wraps just like this. It is about creating those moments that connect with people on a more personal level.
Is there the faith team that then works with those young people on the artwork? Like what you've just said about the Christmas story, how do you share that with younger people and engage their wide thinking?
I think the printed material which goes up with the installations makes some points of reference to scripture, as you did with the key verse from Galatians in the To Be Free exhibition, as we will one or two of those themes around the Darwood Wises in the cathedral at this particular time of the year. Whether you'll ever get those sort of moments of coming to faith through instantaneous encounter with art, I think is more tricky, but I suspect that most people's faith journey is a long and gradual one, and something of that process of encounter with building and ideas, which you've articulated, Beth, it will be true of a lot of people, and I think we do see that with people, with some of the children and young people that we work with, including as singers, as servers through the cathedral school, through those who come on school visits and then bring their parents back. But for most people, faith is an Emmaus road, not a Damascus road. But what are those key staging points on the journey? Stephen?
This carries on the young people's theme. In fact, there's some evidence that young people find they live in a very disenchanted world, and all that we've talked about this evening has been largely to do with ideas, with themes that relate to justice, the environment, etc. In my introduction, I talked about the possibility of transcendence in art, which is related to the idea of enchantment at some level. Do you think there is anything in contemporary art that can provide that? Or is it just, is contemporary art all about things rather than trying to elicit a wordless response? That it's not about ideas, it's about the, gosh, as it were, tradition in art. I mean, one artist that springs to mind is Roger Wagner, or Wagner, I don't know how you pronounce it, but there's a certain sort of, his paintings are by and large not about things, there's a transcendent element in them, even though Didcot Power Station also featured in some of them, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there is, absolutely. And maybe, as you were talking about, maybe I need to do an exhibition about wonder. Because actually what, you know, the exhibition that we did this year, it was, you know, there was a very strong issue-based background to it, as there will be next year. But I do think it does. I mean, I suppose because I don't know if you can be a contemporary art historian, but I think I am a contemporary art historian in that respect. There's so much about the artwork that for me does just sort of transmute a feeling of wonder and joy. You know, when we were sort of brainstorming ideas, I was talking about an exhibition, because the exhibition is so the cathedral is so full of sound and joyful sound, and I feel like there is joyful noise in noiseless art, and I feel like joyful to explore this feeling of joy that comes out of it. I do think that has that transcendent qualities, and again, as we talked about, a kind of a visual language that is non-verbal. I think that, you know, those are the kind of exhibitions that I think could really communicate to a large breadth of people. So yes, I would say so. I understand though that for lots of people contemporary art can be difficult to penetrate, and they may not feel that in the same way I do, but that's our job in interpreting the exhibitions, is to give people those ways in.
There's that lovely line in George Herbert about the man who looks on glass and it may stay his eye, or who pleaseth through it pass, and there the heaven espy. Something about art which grapples with real world stuff, but actually has the potential to take us beyond. And thinking of those bits of the Christian tradition, I'm thinking of the Eastern Orthodox, who are very committed to visual representation through icons, but actually have a very strong sense of God's otherness and majesty and difference with that as well. Judy.
Although it's reasonably interesting we have discussed, which is whether you might consider commissioning an artist, which I realise has got huge cost implications. But when we're talking about artworks and why they are appropriate, there's a completely different dimension if you either to invite an artist for a particular reason, or have an open call, which probably is unmanageable, and with the things you've got in mind, ask that artist or those artists to respond. And thinking about young people, that might be incredibly inspiring for young people to say, well, that's what that artist did, and how might I respond to that question?
I'm just going to relay that in summary to those on this side of the room. Judy was asking about the scope for commissioning work or works of art.
I would absolutely love to. You know, I had this wonderful dream at the beginning of what if we could set up an artist in residency program at the cathedral to give people just time, because the cathedral, there's no way anyone can know everything about this cathedral. It's incredibly rich. There's so many layers of history that are deep layers that, you know, sit on things that we won't see or we do see every day. And I think to see it through an artist's eye is an incredibly rich way to see the building or the space and the kind of place anew each time. But to give, and also, you know, we have glaziers on site, and we have stonemasons on site, and we have a carpenter, and we have so many incredible artists as well that are working day in, day out at the cathedral. I would absolutely love to. At the beginning of every project, I imagine there is an endless budget, that like gravity doesn't exist, and that the doorways are like elastic so you can get anything in. And it's always good to start a project with all those kind of logistical things out the window, because it really focuses your mind on what is actually important. Like, if we could achieve anything, what would we go for? And if I'm very honest, when I requested Cornelia Parker's artwork last year, I didn't think we'd get it, but I thought, well, let's start from what we'd actually want first, and let's see what happens after that. And then we did get it, and I realised I had to work that out. That was a headache. But you know, it's a really, to start big would be really great. And yeah, I would love to do. And it's not completely out of the question. There are thoughts in our minds about what we could do that would be an artist specifically engaging with this place. Because something I've been really keen to do with this programme is that whatever we do in the cathedral couldn't just be picked up and put somewhere else, that it connected to what was special about Salisbury Cathedral. And so, you know, perhaps, and I get asked this a lot, is this exhibition going on anywhere else? And they haven't. It's not that we wouldn't want them to go on anywhere else, but we've made this exhibition thinking very specifically about here and now. And To Be Free really was about responding to Salisbury and Salisbury Cathedral, even though it was reaching out to wider global issues. So I do think that specificity is really important, and that's also something that really comes through strongly through commissioned artwork. Yeah, so yes.
And there are other ways in which we might do things like that. I'm conscious that we're due in the next few days to have the liturgical furniture delivered, which the cathedral has been thinking about for a very long time. A new altar and dais for the spire crossing, and another one for the Trinity Chapel. And the altar work, the metal and stone work, has been produced by Bill Pye, whom some of you will know was responsible for the cathedral's font 15 years ago. And there will be connectivity of ideas from font to altar and then into the Trinity Chapel as well. The spire crossing one will have different images of bits of the building, which we hope might be interactive for children, as well as biblical wording on it. And then into the Trinity Chapel, a rather more challenging wording on that, an extract from one of George Herbert's poems, indeed about an altar. So there are ways in which the cathedral canon is committed to art, which is very specifically for our context and by local artists. We have time for one brief one more from Paul.
We recommend very strongly the idea of getting an artist in residence. We trialled that in Truro while I was there and got some Arts Society money for it. And part of the inspiration was to have ourselves reflected back to us and to a wider audience. So it's an idea that I think would really pay a lot of thought and effort.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's definitely still in my mind, but you know, I won't bore you with the logistical problems and that kind of thing. But yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you.
Perhaps can I just say that if you have a question that you haven't been able to ask, or if a question occurs to you which you wish you'd asked, or you have anything that you'd like to feed into the arts panel, then please do. It will help our discussions, and part of the reason for our holding this evening's get together, and it's splendid to see so many people here. The arts panel is helped enormously by having your views. We've already thanked James and the college for hosting us, but on your behalf, can I thank Kenneth and Beth for all that they've given us this evening.